Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news in the coaching carousel front coming out late Monday morning as Florida State sounds like they're expected to hire Nebraska defensive coordinator Tony White for their vacant defensive coordinator position. I think there's a couple of things that you can do to evaluate this hire. And I think most importantly, kind of take a look at how the Nebraska fans are reacting to the news. And I think rightfully so, it's disappointment. Tony White is largely considered one of the best in the business as a defensive coordinator. In fact, 12 months ago, his name was getting floated around as a potential head coach and has done a phenomenal job with Nebraska's defense the last 2 years. And I think how you want to talk about this hire, it's kind of two different fronts. One, what is Tony White as a coach? What do we expect to see from this Florida State defense? And then secondly, what is he as a recruiter, which is, a big conversation that we've had with Florida State as they're looking to rebuild this staff. There needs to be an emphasis on what you're doing on the high school recruiting trail. Really excited to get into this one now. Before we do, and as always, Florida State fans, I'm sure some Nebraska fans are checking this out too. Would love to hear some thoughts and opinions, some comments that y'all have in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Now, there's no official statement from Florida State. When it becomes official, we'll probably do a deeper dive into Tony White and what he brings to Florida State. Let's talk about him as a coach first. And I think it starts with everywhere Tony White has been. He's been very successful building, coaching, and developing defenses. And I think there's a couple of key indicators in terms of how you can evaluate defensive coordinators. I personally like to see, hey, what do they do on third downs and what do they do in the red zone? And Nebraska's defense has always been very good on third downs. They've been really good in the red zone, and they stop the run in a big time way. Now, you get into what's made him successful as a coach. I think it's one scheme. This is a defensive coordinator that is not going to be vanilla with what he's calling on defense. He's going to give a lot of different looks. He's going to a lot of different pressure packages, a lot of different coverage packages. It's going to be a complex defense, and I think this Florida State defense as a whole is going to have to grasp it if you want to be successful. But he does a really good job leaning into what his defenses do best. And I think it starts with the defensive line. And there are reports that the defensive line coach for Nebraska, Terrence Knighton, will also be potentially making the move as well. Terrence Knighton, really good recruiter, really good developer of defensive lines. So I think that's a really good hire as well if that does happen for Florida State. You look at Tony White, it first starts with the front. 3-3-5 is kind of his base, but he's going to give you so many different looks. You're going to see four-man fronts. You're going to see three-man fronts. You're going to see five-man fronts. You're going to see pressure from a lot of different angles and ways. He's really creative in terms of how he uses his personnel in the front seven. And I think one of the best examples is how they use Ty Robinson, one of their probably their best player on defense, on the defensive line, a guy that played a little nose, played out on the edge, played three tech, consistently putting Ty Robinson in positions for him to be really, really disruptive. So I think the creativity within the front seven is kind of where you want to start. Now, in the secondary for Nebraska, it was a little bit more of a bumpier road in 2024. It was good in 2023, not as much in 2024. And I think that kind of had to do with Nebraska fans. I'd love to hear your opinions on this as well. Playing some guys out of position and having some injuries and having some depth concerns at certain spots where you're playing a guy like Buford at boundary cornerback where he's probably best suited to be a safety. And so there were some, I wouldn't say coverage busts, there were some struggles that we saw in the secondary with assignment and play. I think that largely had to do with some of the depth problems that they had in the secondary. But at the end of the day, this is a Nebraska defense that has been very good turning the football over, very good at creating negative plays, and most importantly, stopping the run. All things that Florida State really struggled with in 2024. And I think most importantly, you look at the most disappointing aspect of this Florida State defense is that defensive line never really took over games the way we thought. Going back to how beat reporters and how people were talking about Florida State's defensive line in the month of August, we thought we would get just a bunch of game wreckers, a defensive line that was going to smother opponents. You didn't really get that. If you land Tony White and if you get Terrence Knighton, I think he can do a better job of maximizing the talent of Florida State on the defensive line, right? Patrick Payton might come back for another year. Extremely talented dude. We all know Marvin Jones, although didn't play great at times, we all know how talented he is. Darrell Jackson's another good example, guys, just not getting maximized on the defensive line. I think you see a better maximization of this front seven for Florida State with Tony White at the helm. Now, the number two thing is as a recruiter. Now, there are some question marks about Tony White as a recruiter, and I think those question marks more stem from, at San Diego State or at Syracuse. It's not; those aren't programs where you're going to put up a ton of crazy recruiting numbers. I think Tony White's best asset as a recruiter is what he puts on the football field. Hey, he develops football players to be the best versions of themselves. And that's one thing that when you're a recruit and you're looking at the best fit, you look at Tony White and say, hey, you're going to put me in the best spot to be successful. I think that certainly helps. If you bring in Terrence Knighton, that's certainly going to help the recruiting as well. My take on Tony White from a recruiter standpoint is he's not a proven dog on the recruiting trail, so to speak. But I think at Florida State, he certainly could be that guy. You're getting a really good football coach, and now Mike Norvell, I think, has the responsibility to go look at your position group coaches. Those are the guys in my mind that you want dogs on the recruiting trail. Those are the guys that are going and meeting with players and kind of building those relationships. Yes, it starts with the defensive coordinator when you're recruiting defensive prospects. To really get that close relationship, it comes from the position coaches. So I think Mike Norvell, in my opinion, is doing it the right way in terms of Tony White, really, really good defensive mind. Now you surround him with some position coaches, guys like Terrence Knighton, who can be very, very good on the recruiting trail. That's kind of how you want to see this staff built. And I think finally, like Tony White's a proven developer. And that's something that we just haven't seen from Florida State. What was that kind of underlying problem that nobody ever talked about, even when Florida State was winning all those games in 2023, was there's not a ton of guys on this roster, even when they were a very good football team, that were homegrown. There was a lot of guys that you hit on in the transfer portal who already were pretty damn good football players that came into the program. Now, you love that Florida State can evaluate the transfer portal and go grab those guys like Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. You can't always rely on that, because then you get 2024 when you miss on guys in the portal, then you don't have any homegrown talent. That's kind of how you have the bottom fall out, so to speak. Tony White's very good at recruiting guys, developing the right way, and kind of creating good football players, homegrown good football players. And I think that's going to matter a lot if Mike Norvell wants to turn this thing around from what happened in 2024. My overall take, this is about as good of a hire as you could have made, in my opinion. And it just takes kind of going to Nebraska's message boards and what the Nebraska fans are saying on Twitter. Like they know this guy's a really good football coach, and this is a big loss for Nebraska. We'll have the conversation for Nebraska as well in terms of where they go at the defensive coordinator position. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.